The ship's whistle vanished into a fog so thick it felt like wet cloth over the face. Men crowded the slanting deck, breath ghosting as water lapped around their boots. Out of the gray, a blunt bow loomed off the starboard side, a wall of steel that did not slow. The impact sounded like a house splitting. Wood shrieked, metal tore. The deck lurched and the troopship heaved, taking the sea in one cold rush. In the seconds after, men understood the Mendy was dying beneath them. It had begun weeks earlier under a Cape Town sun. The SS Mendi, a British passenger steamer turned troopship, loaded nearly 1,000 men of the South African Native Labor Corps, mostly black South Africans recruited as stevedores and laborers for the Western Front. Farmers, miners, clerks who signed on for pay and pride. New uniforms, no rifles. In January, the ship called at Lagos and Sierra Leone, then pushed north into winter seas. U-boats hunted the lanes, convoys formed and broke, and by mid-February, the Mendy reached Plymouth to await orders for the short run to France. Before dawn on February 21st, 1917, the Mendy steamed east by north through the English Channel, south of the Isle of Wight. A low fog lay on the water. Speed dropped and the whistle sounded at intervals. Men crowded lower decks or leaned at the rails for air. The sea was steady, engines sure. What came was sudden, another hull angling across their path. The other ship was the Darro, a large cargo steamer moving too fast for the conditions. Her bow struck forward on the starboard side, tearing a mortal wound. Water surged through the rent, and the ship listed at once. Officers and NCOS fought the angle of the deck to get men topside and to the boats. Fog erased distance between shouts. Some lifeboats smashed against the hull and spilled their human load. Others launched overladen into black water already crowded with wreckage. On the troop deck, a chaplain, Reverend Isaac Wachopa Dioba, climbed onto a hatch and raised his arms. The men knew him. They quieted the way they did on parade grounds, far from this frozen place. He told them to be brave, to die like brothers, to help one another, to remember the chiefs and fathers whose names were alive in them. Then he set a steady rhythm with his boots, and the men stamped with him, measured, controlled, the sound of courage holding its line. In that rhythm they steadied hands and moved the weakest toward ladders and rafts. The deck canted steeper. The water came up. Cold did its own killing. The channel in February strips heat from the body in minutes. Men who reached the sea breathed in needles and lost strength. Some clung to planks and drifted in circles, calling into a fog that swallowed their names. Others found boats and hauled strangers in until the gunwales kissed the surface and another inch would swamp them all. The Mendy settled, stern rising, funnels tilted as if listening for one last order. When she finally let go, it was quick, a hiss, a long boil, and the spot where she had floated became a field of heads and torn wood. Rescue took shape by sound more than sight. A patrol vessel answered. Other ships edged near as best they could without mowing men down. Fog and fear turned navigation into shouted bearings and bells. In the lifeboats, NCOs kept rhythm with oars and tried to count survivors who could not speak. Those pulled aboard coughed seawater and shook. In one boat, an officer scratched names on a wet page. On another, men passed a single blanket across 3 bodies in turn. By mid-morning, the fog lifted enough to show the channels flat gray. The toll was brutal. More than 600 dead, most of them from the Labor Corps, along with sailors from the Mendy's crew. Survivors were in the low hundreds. The Labor Corps had been bound not for trenches, but for railheads, docks, and timber yards that fed an army. They would have lifted shells, built roads, unloaded coal. The war took them anyway. News traveled back to South Africa in cable fragments and letters that tried to carry the weight of what had happened. A court of inquiry followed. It studied whistles and courses, the rule of safe speed, and the duty to stop and render aid. Witnesses described a fog that closed the world to a ship's length and made even a bell feel like a lie. The Darro's handling drew the harshest light. Findings faulted her speed and her failure to take immediate steps that might have saved more lives. The consequence for her master was a suspension measured in months. For families, a word that changed nothing. Loss took physical form in places that had never heard the name Mendi. Southampton's Hollybrook Memorial gathered the names of those with no known grave. South Africa carried its grief into stone and ceremony at home. The roll included sons from Xhosa, Zulu, Sotho, Pedi, and Tswana communities, men drawn by pay, pride, or the push of recruiters to a war that had asked little of them until it asked for everything. Some survivors could not find words at all and sent pages that said they were alive and then fell quiet. Years passed. War ended. The Mendi became one more story in a century crowded with catastrophe. Yet the channel keeps its wrecks, and divers knew the rough grid where she had gone down. In the 1970s, sport divers found a wreck south of the Isle of Wight that fit her bones. Broken plates, scattered cargo, a hull matching records. The site was later protected, and the Mendy's name returned to public memory. Each February, ceremonies name the lost and repeat the chaplain's words. It is easy to flatten a disaster. A collision in fog, one ship crippled, hundreds drowned, an inquiry's blame, a memorial's stone. The real shape resists flattening. It looks like a man in a sodden jacket, holding another by the collar and deciding who gets the last place over the gunwale. It sounds like stamping feet on a tilted deck, not in panic, but in steady rhythm. It feels like the shock of channel water that steals breath and will. It smells like coal smoke and wet canvas. The men of the Mendi carried no rifles. They carried the war's weight, the work that keeps machines moving and armies supplied. Their story forced itself into view, not because of victory, but because of how they met the moment they could not escape. A chaplain's voice, a deck becoming a slope, a field of wreckage and heads in a whitening fog. These details fix the event in the mind. The numbers, over 600 dead, anchor it in national memory. South Africa would mark this date to honor its armed forces, a reminder that service can look like labor and courage can look like steady feet on a failing ship. Decades on, the channel still moves over the place where the Mendi lies. Some days the water is green. Others, it is the same gray the men saw when the Darro appeared out of nowhere. Divers describe silence down there, the kind that turns a human breath into something you can hear. They talk about silt and broken steel, about leaving no marks. They surface believing the wreck is not just a thing, but a record. It tells a short story you can read in one pass: approach, impact, flood, list, vanishing. The long story sits with families, with parades that pause for a name, and with winter fog that makes even safe water feel less certain. What endures is not only the mistake in the fog, it is the behavior on the deck after the mistake. Men from villages half a world away stood together in a place colder than anything they knew and chose order over fear. In choosing it, they gave witnesses words to carry home and gave a country a scene to hold. The sea took their bodies. The story stayed above water. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.